Now, Andrew Gillum can't work. He's running on impeaching the president. For what? You know, I don't know what he's thinking about impeachment. I mean, this is a guy that took bribes from an undercover FBI agent, took money from a lobbyist, did favors for the lobbyist. Maybe we should impeach Gillum as mayor of Tallahassee.
That's the crowd at President Trump's rally in Florida last night, erupting in chants of lock him up, while Republican gubernatorial candidate Ron DeSantis spoke about his opponent on stage. The Democratic nominee running for governor in the state of Florida, Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum, joins us now. Thanks very much for being on the show this morning. So I guess I want to ask you to respond to those chants and to those claims made on stage by your opponent. Is this the kind of thing you expected when you decided to run for governor?
Well, I have to tell you, Mika, first of all, good morning. But I missed last night's rally. I was taking my 3 kids through the neighborhood trick-or-treating. My kids prefer treats, not tricks. And it sounds like they had a little bit of trickery last night. But listen, this is more the same of what we get from this president and from my opponent, Mr. DeSantis. From day one, he's gone completely to the gutter on this campaign, not talking to voters about what he wants to do, what he wants to achieve, but rather trying to distract them with sideshows. You probably have seen from even our debate stages, every opportunity he's had to talk to Florida voters about what he wants to do for them, he has not stood up to that opportunity. And I think that's been a lost cause for him. I believe we're going to win this race for governor because we're talking about the issues that matter and are giving voters something to vote for and not just against.
So the president has called you a thief. Ron DeSantis has used some racist overtones in his language as well. But let me just ask you about the actual issue and the Hamilton tickets and the FBI investigation. Any errors in judgment in that situation that you can clear up?
Yeah, well, let me first say, if the president's called me a thief, if I'm stealing anything, it's hearts and minds. We're going to win this race, frankly, because of that reason. On the issue, as I've said all along, I have zero tolerance for corruption. I am not under FBI investigation, and neither is my city. What we have done is aided them all the way along. Hamilton has, again, been a sideshow. And again, my opponent has, I believe, failed to stand up, talk to Florida voters about what he wants to do. He would prefer to, again, distract us. He refused to talk about the $145,000 in travel receipts of public money that he still won't make available to the public. He has taken money from overt racists and anti-Semites and deniers of the Holocaust. And won't return that money and is using it instead to run false advertisement against me. Every single ad that Mr. DeSantis has run in this race that includes my name has been rated independently as false. As far as I'm concerned, he lacks what is the #1 qualifier for someone who wants to be governor, and that is a governor who's going to level honestly with people. He failed that test, and I believe that that's one of the reasons why he won't win this race.
Mayor Gillum, it's Willie Geist. Good to see you again this morning. I'm sure you've seen the report in the Tallahassee Democrat that shows that you took a flight, private travel, to and from a round-trip flight back in February of 2016 from Tallahassee down to St. Pete. You put it on the mayor's expense account because you said you were there on city business. These new records seem to indicate while you were there, you met with potential donors as you considered whether to run for governor in the state of Florida. I know you've attacked the source of this as being an ally of Ron DeSantis, but just on the substance of it, were you meeting with donors down there, or was it purely city business?
Well, let me first say that wasn't city government campaign funds. Those were funds set up after my race to aid me in me doing my job. I met with folks who were assembled discussing with me affordable housing issues. I met with other state leaders, including the former governor, Charlie Crist, and former CFO, Alex Sink, all amazing leaders in our state. I did not raise any funds. The only exchanges there were exchange of ideas. Again, another sideshow, another distraction. I've tried very hard not to address these things from their frame. What voters in our state need to know is that I've served in government for 15 years without so much as a scar to my name. Only when I decided that I wanted to run for governor of the state of Florida did all these folks come from the extreme right attempting to paint me as something that I'm not. The reason why I won my race overwhelmingly for mayor of Tallahassee with 76% of the vote is because my community trusts me. I won the Democratic primary because our voters trust me. And I'm going to win this race for governor because the people of the state of Florida trust me.
So just to clarify for those voters who are watching, the flight to and from St. Pete, was that paid for with city money?
It was not paid for with city money.
What was it paid with?
It was paid out of my office account, which is leftover campaign contributions. You're allowed to move into an office account that you can then use, and there's very little guidance on it, but to aid you in whatever way you deem appropriate in carrying out your responsibilities, helping to inform your positions. And in this case, it was used appropriately, and there has been no source, no ethics determination, and certainly no legal conclusion that would suggest that I've done anything wrong or inappropriate.
Mayor Gillum, I'm going to assume that Florida is no different than most other states, and the people in Florida are not a whole lot different than people in other states, that they're interested in things like health care and traffic and their children's schools and better education. But given the tone, the tenor of not only your campaign, but campaigns throughout the country this fall, this political season, is there anything about your campaign, about your rhetoric, about things that you've said and done in your campaign that you regret?
Not at all. In fact, I think we've run a campaign that should be modeled. We have focused at every turn. And again, I would just reference people to the 2 public debates that were held in this race. Every time I was asked a question about my policy ideas, we offered those up. We gave concrete proposals as to what we would do with regard to health care, expanding access to Medicaid. My opponent would not even cop to the fact that he voted over a dozen times to repeal the Affordable Care Act, that he voted to allow insurance companies to discriminate against coverage based off of pre-existing conditions, telling a cancer patient when asked how they were supposed to get access to health care that they could go to the emergency room. There are a lot of differences in public policy that my opponent and I have. On that issue alone, I find him disqualified for the office. I don't know why you would deliberately work to keep people from getting access to health care. Now, I will tell you, I also haven't taken any punches from my opponent. When my opponent has ventured into, I think, distracting areas like race and like stoking stereotypes, playing basically on the color of my skin, we called him out for it. And I honestly think that we got to do more of that. There are not 2 sides of this thing. You either see people as who they are and you treat them in the humane way that we deserve, or you don't. You either give people something to vote for or you don't. You either use this hyperbolic and subset of racism in your campaign or you don't. We've tried to make ours a campaign about what we want to do for the people of our state. My opponent has failed to do that all along the way, and last night's example of a campaign rally is just one other way in which you see that they're not trying to convince voters to vote for them. They're trying to convince voters to vote against me.
Mayor Gillum, Susan Del Percio here. I'm from New York, one of the highest tax states in the country. And I hear often that a lot of New Yorkers are going down to Florida because of the tax system there. Now, you have said that you are willing to raise tax, increase corporate taxes to pay for some of your programs. How do voters from Florida know you're not going to take this to a personal income tax or even further increase than what you've already said, the corporate tax rate?
Yeah, let me be clear. It's a good question. So first of all, I oppose an income tax. We don't have a state income tax. My opponent has suggested that I'm in favor of it. The governor of the state of Florida couldn't even impose an income tax on the people of the state of Florida because the Constitution prevents it. As to the corporate tax rate, let's be clear, 97% of businesses in my state pay no corporate taxes at all. 97%. 3% of companies in the state of Florida, the wealthiest 3% of companies in our state, pay the corporate tax rate. It's the same 3% that walked away under the Trump tax realignment with $6.3 billion of our money. So what we've said is you can keep $5.3 billion, but we want $1 billion of that to come into the state of Florida and pay teachers what they're worth. And my state teachers' average salary is the 45th lowest of all 50 states. The state of Florida cannot be a cheap date and think that we're going to be able to rise to the highest of our potential. We're 40th out of 50th in quality of public education. In my opinion, this is a win-win. We want you to invest 1/6 of what you got of taxpayer money back into the state of Florida so that we can train your future workforce. I think that that is a sound idea, and I think that we can build consensus with our corporate partners to move in that direction. And again, last I checked, the corporate tax rate in Florida is lower than that of the state of Louisiana, yet both of us have the same McDonald's dollar menu. We're going to build a state based off of strengthening our infrastructure and our talent in the state of Florida.
Mayor Gillum, I think I can call you a young man because it makes me feel young, so I'm going to do it. What do you say, Mayor Gillum, to young voters? We had a poll out here at NBC News that only 31% of millennials plan on voting for sure. They're definitely going to go out and vote. You provide a contrast in your state there as a young man. What do you say to those voters? You know, we've seen the hashtags, we've seen people in the streets, we've seen the T-shirts, we've seen a lot of energy. Yeah. What do you tell those voters to get them out in 5 days?
Well, I have to tell you, first of all, we have to engage young people in a real and an authentic way. Young people are not going to show up and vote for candidates who have never come and asked for their votes. One of the reasons why I've done college tours, particularly in this in my campaign, both in the primary and in the general, is because I knew as a young person closely involved in following politics that a lot of times folks didn't come to us. They didn't talk to us. They thought of us as campaign volunteers, but never as real consumers and participants in the process. What I've tried to do is respect young voters in this campaign. Go to them, ask them for their support. Many of these folks want to create change. They want to be part of change. They just haven't been convinced that politics is the best way through it. And what I've said is you can't tweet about it, Facebook about it, Snapchat about it, talk about it, and not be about it. And the best way to be about it is to show up and to cast your vote. I also let young voters know that, listen, they're counting on you not to show up. They're counting on you to keep yourself out of the process. They think you are about moments and not about movements. And this is your time. If you're serious about making an imprint on the kind of country you want to create, on the kind of state you want to live in, you've got to get involved in the process, and voting is just one way to do it. And then beyond that, it's staying involved long enough to hold elected officials accountable for what they say they're going to do.
And Mika, I should point out, by my definition, Ron DeSantis, also a young man. He's only 40 years old.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Mayor Andrew Gillum, thank you very much for being on the show this morning.
Thank you.
And Morning Joe has reached out to Ron DeSantis' campaign multiple times to have him on for an interview, just to talk about the issues, and the campaign has thus far declined. They say no. Ahead, we'll look at another high-profile governor's race. The final debate in the Georgia race is canceled after Republican Brian Kemp drops out. But you wouldn't know that from his explanation. We'll have the fact check just ahead on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.